I'm ready. Hello Internet, this is Olin from What I'm Listening To, and today we're going to be talking about video game soundtracks. Like a lot of kids of the 90s, I grew up playing a lot of video games. I have fond memories of playing games on the Sega Genesis, the N64, the GameCube, the PlayStation 2, the Wii, and the Xbox 360. And while I don't nearly game as much as I did back then, I still do enjoy the occasional modern game playing on the Switch or the PlayStation 5. But gaming also went hand in hand with my love for music. Even when I was a kid, I was fond of the soundtracks in the games that I was playing. It was especially cool when a game had a sound test menu where you could literally listen to the isolated track from whatever portion of the game. I was actually one of those kids who would boot up a game with a sound test menu and just have the music playing in the background while I did other things. Remember, this was before YouTube. But around the time I was a teenager, I discovered that a lot of my favorite video games actually had their soundtracks on CD. That was a game changer. No pun intended. And since then, I have built a pretty nice collection of video game soundtracks on CD from both newer and older games. And I have definitely shown off those soundtracks in various videos too. In 2018, I made a video that was dedicated to the video game soundtracks that I owned, and throughout the years from that video, I would show off a video game soundtrack here and there whenever I was able to pick one up. But today, I wanted to do yet another video dedicated to video game soundtracks. Not only will I be talking about soundtracks that have been featured in miscellaneous other videos, I will also be talking about soundtracks that have never before been shown off in a video. I essentially just wanted to make one video that had everything I'd collected since that previous video game soundtrack video. Video game soundtrack video, that is a mouthful. So with all of that being said, let's dive in and see what we have. The first soundtracks I want to talk about today come in pairs. I have the soundtracks for the games Sonic Adventure 1 and Sonic Adventure 2. Now, both of these are titles that, again, I have covered in previous videos. This one was actually featured in the old video game soundtracks video, and this one I think I showed off in some unboxing video. But I wanted to bring them up again because not only are these soundtracks so meaningful to me, but in general, the Sonic franchise is very, very important to me. Again, I grew up playing games on a Sega Genesis, and 3 of those games I distinctly remember were Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Sonic Spinball, and Sonic 3D Blast. I have very, very fond memories of playing the game myself, not being very good at it, but also watching my brother play those games and being just insanely good. And not only was the gameplay fun, but the soundtracks for those games were so cool. Eventually, when we got a GameCube, I was exposed to both of these games and just absolutely fell in love with them. It was Sonic in 3D, which was really cool, but the music on both these games was especially cool. Instead of the 8-bit and 16-bit soundtracks I was used to hearing in the old games, the songs on here are what I would describe as band music. I guess Sega was still trying to maintain this image that they were cool, and also Sonic was very cool, so a lot of the songs on both these soundtracks are very rock-oriented, which as a teenager I thought was insanely awesome. Sonic Adventure 1's soundtrack is definitely more rock and electronic rock oriented, and then Sonic Adventure 2's soundtrack actually experimented with different genres. Every character you played as in this game had sort of a different genre tied to them. Sonic was more hard rock, alternative rock. Tails and Eggman were more techno and electronic rock. Knuckles was jazzy hip-hop. Rouge the Bat was more straightforward jazz and pop. And Shadow was more dark industrial rock. Just a complete hodgepodge of different styles, which again, was really cool. So having both these CDs in my collection are extremely meaningful to me. I love that Sega had the foresight to put these both out on CD. The music is just too good not to release. So Sonic the Hedgehog, very, very important franchise to me. Love these soundtracks, so stoked they are in my collection. And if you haven't done so already, play these games. They are so much fun.
I ain't gonna let it get to me, I'm just gonna creep down in Pumpkin Hill, I got to find my lost piece.
Next up, I have the soundtrack to one of the Legend of Zelda games. This is the Twilight Princess soundtrack. This is yet another title I have talked about in a previous video. I think this one was also in an unboxing video. In the previous video game soundtracks video, I showed off my copies of the Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and Wind Waker soundtracks. Those are very prized possessions to me because they are some of my favorite Zelda games ever. Majora's Mask probably being my all-time favorite, but I didn't want to bring in those soundtracks again because I've talked about them enough. To me, Twilight Princess is one of the more underrated games in the series. It got a little bit of criticism because its storyline is pretty similar to Ocarina of Time, but I love how gritty it is. The graphics, the visuals, and the music is just so dark and creepy at times. And some of the best songs in the Zelda franchise are on this soundtrack. The rendition of Hyrule Field on here is just completely big and epic, just like Hyrule Field in the game. But I also love songs like the Kakariko Village theme, the Market theme, and the Lost Village theme. Ooh, and the rendition of Gerudo Valley on here is so good. Yeah, there's just so much great material on here. And of course, because there's so much content, there's 3 discs worth of material here, along with a sweet booklet right here. This is a wonderful collection of music. Another lovely addition to my growing collection of video game soundtracks. Next up, I have another pair of CDs here. I have 2 CDs for the Final Fantasy video games. I don't really have a lot to say about this one, but I wanted to bring it up because it is a very cool CD to own. So this CD is just a collection of songs from various Final Fantasy entries. Just looking at the track listing here, songs from Final Fantasy 7, 10, 8, 9, and even songs from 1, 2, and 3, the original games. I'll admit, I didn't grow up playing any of the original Final Fantasy games, but as far as video game soundtracks go, this is actually a really cool collection because I am definitely familiar with some of the themes on here. Things such as Aerith's theme, the Chocobo theme, the Final Fantasy theme from the original. I'm a little disappointed that One Winged Angel isn't on here, but that's okay, I have it on the Kingdom Hearts soundtrack. And then this is the one Final Fantasy game I do remember playing. This is the soundtrack for the game Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, specifically for the remastered version of the game. Now this game I absolutely love, and I even more so love the soundtrack. I have very fond memories of playing the co-op mode of this game with my old friend and neighbor. It was just so much fun to navigate the world and battle monsters together. And the thing that sticks out about this soundtrack to me is its sort of medieval sound. It uses a lot of instruments like horns and lutes, which is definitely a contrast to some of the music that's on this soundtrack. But some of my all-time favorite video game music is on this soundtrack. Unfortunately, the remaster of this game didn't get nearly as high praise as the original version. For the most part, the soundtrack for the remastered version of the game is the same as the original. There are a couple songs that are re-recorded, like the game's main theme, but otherwise, it's the same. It also came with this bonus CD, which I'm not gonna lie, I don't really remember what's on here. It's been a while since I've listened to this thing, but as a fan of extra content, I thought that was a cool little thing to include. I should also shout out my friend Edwin for buying this soundtrack for me. I think it was a birthday present for me. I don't know, it was a long time ago when I got this, but thank you, Edwin. But yes, Final Fantasy, classic games, classic soundtracks, very good stuff on here. Speaking of medieval sounding music, next up I have the soundtrack for the game Ico. This is probably the most recent soundtrack I have talked about in a recent video. It's in the third part of my unboxing trifecta. So because of that, I'm not going to go too much into detail with it. All I'll say is this was a game that I watched my friend play, the same friend actually who I played Crystal Chronicles with. And I absolutely just loved the atmosphere of it. Playing the game was almost like listening to an ambient song. It was very textural and beautiful, sometimes dark, sometimes uplifting. And the soundtrack equally reflects that atmosphere, which makes it just so good. I have still yet to play this game, but now that I have a PlayStation, I'm sure I can find a port of it somewhere. One of these days, I will get to it. Okay, next up, I have yet another twofer. I have both soundtracks for the game Minecraft. Now it's funny because I actually talked about both of these soundtracks on the first video game soundtracks video that I did, but when I showed them off, they were actually burned onto CDRs because I don't think either of these had been put onto CD. But as of this video, both of them exist on CD and LP, which is fantastic, and I have the actual CD releases of them. The Minecraft soundtrack isn't just some of the best modern video game music out there, it is also some of the best ambient music out there. I have seriously put on the Minecraft soundtrack while working at a cafe, and it just works so well. I honestly don't think you need to play the game in order to enjoy the music on here. I recommend anybody who's a fan of Eno or ambient music in general, give both of these a listen. But in all honesty, the game itself is a lot of fun. I remember playing it years and years ago, building houses, exploring. It's a ton of fun. Okay, next up, I have kind of a wild card here. This is the soundtrack for the game Guitar Hero 3. I am a massive fan of the Guitar Hero franchise. I'm also a massive fan of the Rock Band franchise too. I truly believe that without these games, I would not be the music fanatic that I am today. All of those games exposed me to so many bands that I still love to this very day. And while this particular release doesn't have every single song that was featured on Guitar Hero 3, there's still a nice selection of great songs on here, plus some unique entries. The re-recording of Living Colour's Cult of Personality is really insane, especially the solo on there. And of course, the rendition of The Devil Went Down to Georgia is on this soundtrack, which is just badass. And an interesting thing about this CD, at the time when it was first released, when you bought it new, it actually included a download code for you to download 3 exclusive songs to play in the game. Those 3 songs are AFI's Carcinogen Crush, Tina by Flyleaf, and a remix of Putting Holes in Happiness by Marilyn Manson. The Marilyn Manson and the Flyleaf song are actually listenable tracks on the CD, but for whatever reason, that AFI song is not. I guess because Miss Murder is already featured on the soundtrack, so they didn't want 2 AFI songs on the CD. I'm not sure. But either way, this is a really cool soundtrack. It's kind of goofy that I own it, but again, the exclusives were worth it for me to get. And again, I still love these games. They mean so much to me, and I still think of Guitar Hero when I hear specific songs. Next up, I have the Star Wars Shadows of the Empire soundtrack. Now this one's an interesting one because technically it's not a video game soundtrack, but I'm still gonna qualify it as such because some of the songs that are featured on this disc are featured on the Shadows of the Empire video game. But let me backtrack a little bit. Shadows of the Empire was originally a novel that was meant to expand the universe of Star Wars. Of course, this was before the time when Disney denounced those universe-expanding stories as all non-canon. But nevertheless, there was a novel called Shadows of the Empire, and eventually there was also a video game. It came out on both the PC and the N64, and I had the N64 version. And to this day, it is still my favorite Star Wars game. Back in those days, I was a huge fan of shooters, especially a fan of GoldenEye and The World's Not Enough. But not only did I love Shadows of the Empire for it being a shooter, I just loved being able to run around the Star Wars universe. Escape from Echo Base, the asteroid field, Gal's spaceport, just really fun levels. Also an equally frustrating game, but still very rewarding when you beat a level. But getting back to the soundtrack here, technically the stuff on here is music based on and inspired by the original novel. But as I said before, some of the songs on the disc also appear in the game. For example, Beggar's Canyon Chase, Into the Sewers, and portions of Zizor's theme and the destruction of Zizor's palace. This CD is a very, very recent acquisition. I could not believe I finally got it. Again, the video game is my favorite Star Wars video game and one of my favorite games on the N64. So getting this on CD was a total come up. In the wake of all these Star Wars adaptations that have been coming out lately, it would be really cool to see a Star Wars Shadows of the Empire show or movie. I kinda doubt it'll happen, but if it does happen, it'll be great. Staying on the topic of science fiction, next up I have the Halo 3 soundtrack. I touched on this CD at the end of my post-holiday shopping spree video, but I had to bring it back up again because the stuff on here is just so good. Halo 3 was the very first game I got when I got my 360, and to this very day, it is my favorite game in the Halo franchise. I just love how epic the stuff on here sounds, which was achieved because a full-on orchestra was actually used, which at the time was something I really hadn't heard in a video game. But considering how huge the Halo games are, it might as well be the score to an epic sci-fi film. Some of my favorite songs on here include Last of the Brave, Dread Intrusion, One Final Effort, and Three Gates. But really, the entire soundtrack is so very good. So shout out to the Halo franchise, fantastic game. Still staying on the topic of sci-fi, next up I have the soundtrack for the game No Man's Sky. Now, this is a game that I only played a little bit, but my wife played a lot. But I would watch her when she would play, and I just loved the atmosphere of it. In general, I like stuff about space and the vastness of outer space, but I also like games that are more about exploration and discovery versus combat. So watching her go to different planets, taking in their different atmospheres, harvesting stuff, building stuff, was a lot of fun for me to watch. But also part of what makes the game so atmospheric is actually its soundtrack. What I love about this music is its blend of ambient, electronic, and post-rock. Seriously, it sometimes feels like I'm listening to a Mogwai or an Explosions in the Sky album. And this particular release is really cool because it's got two discs. The first disc is the music from the main game, and the second disc is a collection of soundscapes. As a fan of ambient music, that second disc was a selling point to me. Again, barely having played the game myself, only just watching it. A collection of sci-fi soundscapes, sign me up. This soundtrack is really, really good. Again, if you are a post-rock fan, you should definitely give it a listen. And at some point, I will actually sit and play the game in depth myself. At some point, we'll just have to see. Okay, next up, we're gonna go back in time to some more classic sounding game music. I have a CD containing music from the Mario franchise. This is an amazing collection. It is a 2-disc collection of music spanning from the first Mario game all the way to Super Mario 3D World. It's a collection that was put out in celebration of Mario's 30th anniversary, which is an amazing thing. So this has got all the classics. It's got the entire soundtrack for the first Super Mario game, which is only technically 4 songs. But it's also got iconic themes from Mario Bros. 2, 3, Super Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, and Mario Galaxy. When I saw this come into the record store I work at, I could not help but to get it. Not only do I love the Mario franchise, but this CD is just something you don't really see here in America. This is the kind of thing that you would actually have to go to Japan to get, or get it imported from Japan if you bought it online. And because I am a fan of video game soundtracks on CD, it was a no-brainer to buy. Alrighty then, Internet, we are down to the final CD, and that CD is the soundtrack for Pokemon Red and Green. Now, that Mario collection was a really cool thing to find, but this thing was an even cooler thing to find. Again, being a child in the 90s, I was definitely part of the Pokemon craze. I had a Game Boy Color, I had all the original games, I sunk hours into them. I watched the show, I collected the cards, I just loved Pokemon. And this title is just so cool because it has the original Game Boy Color soundtrack, as well as every single Pokemon cry from the original games. And as an added bonus, it also has the soundtrack for the Game Boy Advance remakes Fire Red and Leaf Green. Just chef's kiss. This is the kind of stuff that I am just amazed made it onto CD. Because in my mind, it seemed to make more sense to get the music from like an N64 game or a PlayStation game versus a handheld game. If you ask me as a kid, I would have never thought you could get 8-bit music on a CD commercially. But this is a come up. I absolutely love this collection. At some point, I would love to get the soundtrack for Pokemon Silver and Gold. I know it exists, I have it on my want list on Discogs, but it is expensive. So if I ever find myself in Japan, I'm gonna hunt for it. But until then, I love this thing. This was a find. Shout out to Pokemon. Alrighty then, Internet, that does it for me. Thank you all for listening to me ramble on about video game music. If you liked what you saw today, then please consider hitting that subscribe button. It'll show me the support, and I'll love your face for it. And if you have any video game soundtracks in your collection, whether it's on CD or record or even cassette, I don't know if those exist, let me know what they are in the comments down below. I would love to know. You can also follow me on Instagram for even more music. I post a new album on there semi-frequently, talk a little bit about them, and it gives you a bit of an insight of what else is in my collection. Thank you all again so much for watching. I will see you in the next video game soundtracks video. Until then, this is Olin from What I'm Listening To, signing out. Goodbye.